Thank you very much for being here today and welcome. We appreciate your time and hopefully this will be a wonderful opportunity to learn more about the program. This today is a last in a series of 3 recruitment webinars this year for the CCST Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. Today's is on navigating the CCST Fellowship application and interview process. My name is Renée Cashmere and I am the Fellows Program Manager. I'd like to open our webinar today by acknowledging that I'm presenting to you from the tribal land of the Nisenan people. Sacramento was a gathering place for many local tribes. We acknowledge the Southern Maidu people to the north, the Valley and Plains Miwok peoples to the south of the American River, and we would like to also honor the Patwin Winton peoples to the west of the Sacramento River. Today, I will briefly introduce CCST, provide an overview of the fellowship, and then open up the floor to hear from the 3 amazing panelists that we have here today. The California Council on Science and Technology is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization established 35 years ago at the request of the legislature. CCST was created to provide science and technology advice from the wealth of outstanding academic and research institutions in our state directly to policymakers. California is lucky to have such an incredible network of expertise. At our job, our job at CCST is to help amplify and translate its expertise in this network into actionable advice for policymakers. We do this through a number of mechanisms, including expert briefings, workshops, we write peer-reviewed reports, and of course, we run the CCST Science and Technology Fellowship program, which is why you're all here today. We recruit, train, and place PhD scientists and engineers for a year of government service and leadership training in the executive branch and the legislature. The current class of fellows just began our 14th year, and we've trained over 150 PhD scientists and engineers in policy. We are very excited because our applications for the 15th cohort just opened on December 1st and will close on February 28th. You do not need to have your PhD in hand to apply for this year. We just require that you plan to finish your PhD by September of this year in order to be done before you begin the fellowship. Interviews are in May or early June, and the fellowship begins on November 1st. Though the past 2 years, we've been able to offer a handful of fellows a sooner start date than November in the CCST office, working on CCST expert briefings, workshops, and other policy work before the bootcamp training begins in November. So please do apply, even if the November start date is not ideal for you. As I mentioned, today's webinar is the 3rd in a series, and the first 2 covered the topics of why choose the CCST Fellowship and what it's like to be a CCST Fellow. Both are available for viewing on our YouTube channel and our website if you would like to watch them. Today, we will focus on navigating the fellowship and application and interview process, and I have with me 3 alumni who will share their experiences with you about how they navigated the process, and you will be able to ask them questions. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions to the panel. For today's questions, we'll prioritize questions that are about applying. But if you have other questions, please reach out to us here at CCST via email. Panelists, I would love to have you introduce yourselves and share some information about the year you were a fellow and where you were placed to start us off. Natalie, I'll have you kick us off, please.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Natalie Gasca, and I was a fellow last year in 2022. Placed in the Department of Pesticide Regulation. And actually right now I am placed, I'm officially with the department as an outreach and legislative analyst. So it was a nice seamless transition. And I just wanted to share a little bit about why I applied to the fellowship. For me, it was to have a better understanding of like the different interests and competing priorities that public policymakers have. Especially as it relates to social and public health issues. And for me personally, it was a nice way to return to my home state since I did graduate school in Washington State. I studied biostatistics, so the analysis part of public health. And apart from that, I think I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences with you all, and really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Next, I'll have Rabab speak about her her placement and placement year.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rabab Charafeddine. I did my PhD in cell biology in Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York, and then my postdoc at UC San Francisco. I was a 2021 year fellow and placed in the California Department of Insurance, where I now work as a climate risk specialist. And I would not have envisioned 2 years ago, looking at cells under the microscope, and now co-writing a roadmap for sustainable insurance, for developing a sustainable insurance sector, if it wasn't for the CCST Fellowship, which I really, when I decided to have this career transition from academia to policy, I wanted to be part of a program that was supportive in that transition. And going to webinars like these and talking to alumni, I really liked what I heard about their experiences in the program and the institution itself. And I also really liked them, which I think is really important for me. And also it's set in California, a state that I really connected with. And, it's the 5th largest economy in the world, where good science-based policy is still being done and still being considered in political decision-making. And last but not least, as a Lebanese Greek, the fellowship is open to non-citizens, which I really appreciate in the policy sphere. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Rabab. Next, we'll hear from Jacob.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob O'Connor. I am I got my PhD in biochemistry from the University of Washington, just like Natalie. I'm a year 13 fellow as well, 2022, and I was placed in the Senate Environmental Quality Committee. And I'm going to be starting a position soon in the California Senate and the Transportation Committee.
Thank you so much. We're really looking forward to hearing from all three of you today. So I will begin our first question to the panel, which is, what did you do to help prepare for the application or interview process? So if I could have Natalie start again, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, I actually heard about the fellowship through a variety of conferences. And so through that, I was able to really dig in and think through if I wanted to pursue science policy. So really looking at different materials, talking to alumni and current fellows, especially as I went along the interview process, and doing a lot of preparation for a non-academic type of position was what I ended up doing. Sharing materials with somebody who was more policy inclined, whatever interview prep resources I could find. And that was sort of my approach this was my top position that I was hoping to get after my PhD. And so I was really trying to do my best to get that interview.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Jacob, how about you?
Yeah, pretty similar, I think. I first heard about the fellowship through a science communication conference that I helped organize at the University of Washington. A former alumni from the program came, and I was like, oh, this is a cool thing, never heard about it. And I looked into it, I was like, this sounds great. So to prepare, I watched all these briefings that they did our year as well that were very helpful. I talked with that previous fellow and got just information from him about what it was like and what he did to be a successful applicant and that sort of thing. And then kind of more generally, I knew I was interested in pursuing a career outside of academia, either in science communication or science policy. And so in my time during my PhD, I spent a fair amount of time practicing public science communication and other opportunities to kind of translate my PhD skills outside of the lab. And I think that was really helpful for my application.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacob. And Rabab.
Yeah, it's a similar experience talking to alumni, current fellows. Also, really, I even before deciding, I also tried to kind of do a little bit, like dip my toes in different policy avenues, just to see if I really enjoyed the work, other than like enjoyed the concept of the work. And that I found that to be helpful. And I also found that anything I did from science outreach and engagement to communication, I interned in local government, and I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. So I was really confident coming into the application.
Thank you so much. The next question I want to ask will be about the CV. Do you have advice on the application CV, and are there particular ways that you advise formatting it, or things that should be included that you might not otherwise think to include? Any advice on the CV? And how about we start with Jacob?
Okay. Yeah, I don't entirely remember how I structured my CV. But I think the thing to keep in mind, right, is that everyone applying to this program has their PhD, and it's kind of assumed coming into this that you are a competent researcher, you know how to perform scientific research. And so we want to see that listed. We want to see that you got your PhD from this university. If you have a publication, great. But that's not really the focus, I think, of what your CV should be, because that's not really going to be the unique thing you're bringing to your application. What we really want to see is, where have you applied your science in ways that maybe aren't typical to academia, whether that's volunteer work, whether that's communication work, if that's an internship. Those sorts of opportunities outside of the lab and outside of academia, I think, are really valuable to highlight, because that's what will cause you to stand out.
Wonderful, thank you. Rabab, did you have anything you'd like to add to that from your experience?
I also don't really remember how I structured my CV, but I think I remember trying to, show off that I was well-rounded, that I wasn't only like doing, being in the lab, in the microscope room, or doing my research. I just wanted to show that I'm interested in other things, not necessarily that I didn't feel like I have to like show that I'm like a policy professional, but just more that I was really interested in this, and that my experience shows that through my CV, my track.
It's a really great point that the interest is there. Thank you. Natalie, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, so I'll just start by sharing that for me, how to express science policy as an interest of mine was a little more challenging for me, since I didn't have much formal experience in the policy world, but I did have a lot of interest and experience in science communication. So I really emphasized that in interdisciplinary research, like consulting, teaching, a lot of outreach, whether it's science or otherwise related. And so I ended up, after listing the typical education piece, I did go through my extracurriculars, so science communication activities, consulting and teaching, fellowships and grants. And it wasn't until towards the end that I had the typical publications and presentations. And so I was really trying to emphasize the other aspects of my experience for this application.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie. Our next question comes from one of our attendees who submitted through a Q&A, and that is, what type of questioning should we expect from the interview? Would it be technical, general problem solving, or personal characteristics? In your experience, what type of questions were you asked? So Rabab, I'll have you start.
For the final interview, I remember it was really nerve-wracking for me, because it is a panel interview. But once the interview started, I felt really very well. It felt like everyone's trying to make you feel calm and comfortable, and they really make you feel seen, because they've read your application, they've read your homework, they know a lot about you, so you know that they're going to ask you specific questions about your experience. And I remember thinking, I was like, oh wow, these are good questions. I'm gonna think about those later too. So yeah, it was a lot of for me, it was a lot of personal questions about my experience, what I learned about myself from my experiences, how I think, going through problem solving, just like I remember specifically about the homework. It's like how I didn't feel like it mattered the answer, but how I got to the answer. So yeah, it was a lot of that, the process of thinking, what got me here, what makes me me, kind of. I thought it was, yeah, and it was a really, actually, really one of the best interviews I've had. It felt like they know what they're doing.
That's great to hear. Thank you. Natalie, what was your experience like?
Sure. I don't fully remember the different pieces of the interview. I kind of blacked it out after getting through it. But I think some of the key pieces, similar to what Rabab was sharing, is a little bit about how you communicate and express yourself. So I do remember at one point they asked us to summarize our research very briefly. And so I did practice for that one. They gave us advance notice. And so just thinking how I would communicate it with like a family member who wasn't familiar with that topic area. Another piece was why I wanted to pursue this fellowship and why now. And so just really thinking through, reviewing my application essay, what I put in there, but also if there's anything else that I wanted to share at that point. I think just really getting a sense of why you want to go to this particular fellowship. I think highlighting those types of ideas are really important. And perhaps there might have been something about how you interact in a team or how others would describe you. I thought that was a really thoughtful application or interview question. But that's for now what I can share.
Great, thank you. That gives a very good snapshot of some of the questions that will be coming. And Jacob, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, not too much. I think someone mentioned, like, are there technical questions? No, you're not going to be quizzed on like the structure of California's Senate or like how a bill becomes a law or anything like that. Don't worry about that. Like Rabab and Natalie mentioned, there will be some questions that you'll be prepped for. There will be a homework assignment where you're asked to analyze a piece of legislation. So be given like a week or something. I don't remember the exact time frame, but they'll send you out like, here's this legislation, write up a page on it as if you were briefing a senator or something like that. And then in your interview, you'll be asked like, I see you recommended this. Why do you think that? What if your boss said no? What would your response be if they disagreed with you? And just trying to put yourself in the situation of someone actually working for a legislator or a different policymaker, might be someone in the executive branch. And then there was also that question about, please explain your research to a general audience. So being able to very clearly articulate why you're interested in CCST in particular, why you think it's a unique and good opportunity and something that will further your goals. There are lots of people, I do want to be clear, that like get the fellowship that don't necessarily have been working towards science policy for the entirety of their PhD, right? This can be something you've can't come to kind of later in your decision-making process, as long as you're clear about like why you think CCST is the right next step for you.
Thank you, Jacob. And thank you for touching upon the fact that we don't expect tons of policy experience coming into this, because that's why most people are here, is to learn about it. So appreciate that. Our next question is from an audience member as well. And it is, what is the, is CCST open only for people who have received their PhD recently? Is there, requirements for how long ago or how recently that you have received your PhD? And I could help you answer that, but wondering what your experience was with that.
I can start because I was a fourth year postdoc, and I honestly was feeling quite kind of like, am I just too old for this? Like to transition now? And I did not feel that way at all with CCST. I did feel that way in another fellowship. I'm not going to name names, but it definitely was not an issue for me at least, when I did my PhD, and it was never like a topic of like, oh, why did you wait this long, or this kind of. It felt like, it's not a topic of interest. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rabab. Anything either Natalie or Jacob would like to add?
I guess the only other thing, like, being relatively far out from your PhD isn't a big problem. There are people in our cohort who have been through postdocs and, and people who just came straight out of grad school. But I do think part of the goal of the fellowship, right, is to introduce you to the policy world. And so if you're someone who has a lot of experience working in policy, one of the questions might be, why are you interested in this fellowship when you could just get a job in the field?
Good point. Thank you, Jacob. And just to summarize, reiterate, we do encourage people from different stages of their postdoc career to apply. And you certainly don't need to be a recent graduate. Many people are, but we also get people who are several years out of their programs. And that is absolutely no issue. And as Rabab stated, that's not something that we will focus on, asking you to explain why that would be the case. So our next question, is it advantageous to talk about certain departments that you're interested in within the personal statement that you submit in your application process, or do you run the risk of limiting yourself? So thinking back on what you might have written in your personal statements, and if you had particular interest before as you were coming into this, anything you would like to advise about that? And we can start with Natalie, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I remember correctly, I think I expressed interest in certain topic areas, not necessarily naming names of committees or anything like that. I was less familiar with the structure of California, the political landscape there, but I think you also want to keep in mind to see how flexible you are, because I think that's one of the key aspects of the fellowship, where it's sort of a combination. It's not necessarily you choose where you're going to end up, right? The fellowship has a lot of things to consider in terms of where you're placed. And so expressing, I think, your interest is totally valid, but also being sort of thinking through, like, are you flexible to jump across a very different subject area is something to consider.
Thank you so much. Jacob, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think I know in my application, I definitely mentioned that, like, here's some things in California that interest me that I think I could bring a unique perspective to. Like, I think there was a COVID response that I was like, I am a biochemist, maybe I could be helpful here. But I think being clear that you are interested in that flexibility is important, just because CCST at this point has no idea what offices are going to be available for you to work in next year. And so if you spend your whole application talking about, like, I really, really want to work for CARB, they can't guarantee that you're going to be working there. And so it's going to be really hard to, say you should come on when we can't give you what you want out of the fellowship. Thank
you. Rabab, anything you'd like to add before I move on?
Just that, like, what I thought in the beginning for the application did not, I ended up I would not have dreamed to be like, oh, I'm placed in the California Department of Insurance. That was not, yes, have ideas of what you want to do, but it's really, like, things change throughout the fellowship. But I think it's good to, like, show that what the policies you're interested in. At least that's what I remember stating. I was really interested in housing policy, climate policy. So yeah, but keep an open mind.
Thank you. Yeah, one thing Natalie said, one word I heard you say was flexible. And that is something that we very much are looking for, is coming into this with flexibility. Of course, you'll have passions, interests, things you're curious about, but flexibility is definitely key. I will move on to the next question that we received, which is, how did you choose your recommenders, especially choosing between extracurricular, teaching, and researching mentors? How should the letters of recommendation differ from the letters that you get for academic positions? And I'll start with Natalie, please.
Sure. So I will share that when I applied, I believe we had 3 slots with an additional potential 4th one if we needed to. So we had a little bit more room to play around with that. I did ask my chair, because she was a very strong mentor and had seen some of my science communication skills, to write a letter for me. I asked another professor who was on my committee, but more importantly was also a consulting and TA professor who I talked to, so they could speak about that particular avenue. And then I did talk to, I did have a consulting client write a letter, since I had like over a year relationship with her and was able to showcase how I approached consulting across a variety of disciplines. And what I ended up doing was listing out the keywords that the fellowship was looking for in terms of the qualities. And so really asking each of those letter writers to focus on certain aspects that I thought could paint a broad picture of who I was with the particular relationship that they had with me. So that was my approach.
Wonderful, thank you. Rabab, what was your experience?
Yeah, I also wanted I thought about for my recommendations letters, I think it was 3 for my year, and to have, you know, people who know me in the lab and in academia and people who know me outside. So I remember, which I have to, you know, I had my postdoc PI write a recommendation letter and my PhD PI. And I recognize that's kind of almost a privilege in a lot of times in academia where, you know, we were like, oh, why are you applying for this? But I had very I have to say, I had very supportive mentors. So I was very lucky with that. And my third one was I wanted to have, I remember really wanting during my postdoc, wanting to have a mentor outside of lab. And that was for me, when I did my communications internship in a breast cancer foundation. And I really learned a lot from her, like simple things like how to write an email to, like, you know, people from outside, which, you know, in lab, you don't get to do as much. So I really I thought she would be a great third letter of recommendation.
Thank you. And Jacob, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I think my 3 letters were my PI, my most direct postdoc mentor, and then someone who I worked with on a project through the National Science Policy Network for a couple months. So, you know, 2 people who knew me from my work life, and then 1 person who knew me from my extracurriculars. And I definitely say, I think it's a good idea to probably have at least 1 person who can speak to your work outside of the lab and 1 person who can speak to your work just daily, like as a worker in an environment on a team with other people. I think having both of those perspectives is really helpful. I also kind of was in a unique position where my PI, has a very large lab. It has about 80 people working in it. So he didn't have time to write my recommendation letter. So he actually asked me to write my own recommendation letter, and then he signed off on it. So that experience, while kind of awkward, was a really eye-opening and helpful for me, because once I had done that, I had as part of that process, I kind of made a list of, like, here are the points that I'd really like a recommender to hit. And then once I had that list, I was like, well, let me just forward that to my other 2 recommenders, because then they can incorporate that into their letters. So I think, like Natalie mentioned, having a list of, like, I think these are things that the fellowship's looking for that I think I've displayed while working with you. If you could be sure to mention them in your letter, that'd be great. I think having that list is helpful.
Jacob, I really like that idea of writing your own letter, even if they don't ask you to kind of focus on what it is you'd like conveyed about you. So that's good feedback, all 3. Thank you so much. We have another Q&A question from the audience, and this is, what experiences and or skills do you want applicants to explicitly highlight in their personal statement? Do publications matter? So I'll start with Jacob on that one.
Publications don't matter. Communicating your science matters. So if you want to talk about how you're writing publications, how that critical writing skills is something you'll be able to transfer to your policy time, great. That is a good thing to talk about. But saying, I got published in Nature, we don't care.
Thank you. How about Rabab?
Yeah, I didn't feel like publications mattered. I did feel like that being a good scientist matters from my experience, that, you know, you know how to communicate your science, you did good science, but you're also interested in policy. So I remember feeling like it was, for me at least, I tried to highlight that, and it helped, with communicating the science as well.
Thank you. Natalie, anything you would like to add?
A lot of similar thoughts to what Jacob and Rabab already shared. For me, it was a lot about communicating, disseminating my work to a variety of audiences, and not just people in my field. And so sometimes I would say I went to conferences that were interdisciplinary, or had poster presentations or oral presentations. So I did emphasize more of that aspect of graduate school. For me, being very service oriented was also key. And so I included that in my application essays, as well as having a strong interest in a variety of disciplines was something that I really played up. And I think lastly, for me, it was just being a team player and really enjoying being in an environment where there's people from a lot of different backgrounds and learning from them. So that's what I ended up focusing on more.
Those are all great points. And communicating about what you do is in various ways is so important because you'll be working with so many different kinds of people that have different levels of knowledge about what your field of expertise is. So thank you for touching on all of those. Our next question is, do you try to be apolitical in your application, such as a topic like climate change? Should you figure out how to talk about that in a way that doesn't make some people uncomfortable? How much did you kind of tailor your opinions in this process? And I'll start with Jacob, please.
It's a great question.
It is.
I'd say it's complicated. First of all, I'd say, you don't have to be apolitical in your cover letter, but you probably should be apartisan, right? As scientists, facts aren't partisan, but they do have implications on policy. That's why we're interested in them. And so, you can have political positions without taking partisan positions. And I think that distinction is important to make when you're thinking about writing your cover letter. And similarly, I think what CCST is looking for is not really the political ideas you have coming in. What they're looking for is someone who's really interested in learning and taking in the environment and figuring out how policy works. Because one of the CCST's core values is service, right? We're here as science policy experts to help policymakers come to informed decisions. And so you might have some opinions on important political issues, and that's valuable, but your job is going to be to synthesize information and present it to a policymaker, no matter what office you get placed in. And to some extent, your personal opinions, while they might inform those recommendations, at the end of the day, you're not the one making the decision. So it doesn't too much matter what you think at the end of the day, as long as you give good analysis. And that can be informed by your personal experience, as long as you're clear which pieces are from your personal experiences and which pieces are from a peer-reviewed paper.
Very well put, Jacob. Thank you. How about Rabab? What was your experience?
Yeah, I agree about the personal experience thing, because I remember highlighting, when I was talking about housing policy, which was a lot on my mind living in San Francisco and working local government, where, talking about homelessness, and it really was about personal experience and wanting to be part of the policy to address the issue of homelessness. So it's, even though it might be, what is, you can get political of like, what are the solutions, but, I'm there to learn and to be, what would be a good policy. And also climate, climate change, I don't think it's a partisan issue in California, but it was also about, wanting to, how do I want to learn about this policy and how to address climate change.
Thank you. And Natalie?
Yeah, I'll just briefly share similarly that I think in the application, it's very valuable to share those types of issues that are important to you. So I think for me, it was a lot of social and health issues. But then when you're actually in the placement, that's where you're very considerate of how you express those opinions, yes, depending on when and where.
Yes, and so much to learn from keeping your mind open in general. There's so many knowledgeable people in the building. So thank you very much. Next question would be about a question we get quite often, which is, how are successful applicants matched with their placement offices? Are applicants picked to fill existing needs in the legislature? What is the process for how you end up where you end up? And I'm going to start with Rabab, please.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Just how successful applicants, how fellows are matched with their placement offices. What is the process, the decision-making that went into your being placed in the office that you were placed in?
Sorry. Yeah, I think it happens, after the boot camp, there is a process of meeting and interviewing with the placement offices. I think our year was like 20 plus offices that were looking for a fellow, and you interview with all of them or most of them if you choose not to interview with some. And so they basically, it's not an interview, because it's like you're interviewing each other, you're meeting each other, and you kind of rank them and they rank you. And like there's a matching process, and there's also a magic that happens behind the scenes that I don't know what happens, but it works. And then you kind of get placed after. I would say that the whole process is a week, if I remember correctly. It's not that long, a week or so.
Yeah, it's usually about a week for the social events where you're meeting people, and maybe another week internally for staff to kind of figure it all out.
Yeah.
So, Natalie, what was your experience?
I think very similar to Rabab, where there's that 1 week of pseudo interviews. It's like, for me, it's in between an informational interview and an actual interview, because it's more like just 30 minutes where you get to know about the people who might be your mentors, and a little bit about what projects they may have in the upcoming year. And so from the fellow side of things, it's thinking about, is this a good match, both in terms of the office and in terms of the projects and whatever other priorities you want to have for the fellowship year. It's interesting because there's always more offices than fellows, so it's almost like they would be happy with any fellow, whereas on our end we have different preferences for different reasons. But like Rabab said, it's a lot of behind the scenes work from the CCST staff who have a lot of great connections with these offices and know other details, but they do consider your opinions and what you want to get out of the fellowship. So long as you can communicate that in the different conversations, I think there's almost all the people have had a very successful experience in the placement, even if it was like for myself in pesticide regulation. I had no idea about this before coming in, but now I've continued with them. So I think trusting the process and being open and adaptable is a lot of key things.
Thank you, Natalie. Anything you'd like to add, Jacob?
Yeah, I was kind of in a unique position this year. I got to be on the other side of the process. I helped with the training of the year 14 fellows, the new fellows, and was involved with that matching process, and I kind of got to see the other side. And the one thing I'll say is that like CCST's biggest priority when setting up these placements is fit, trying to figure out where is a fellow, given their interests and personalities, going to do a great job and feel supported and really succeed in what they want to do during the next year. And so, they take into account what the fellows want, but they'll, you've got the whole boot camp to talk to the various CCST staff members. There'll be interviews with you in order to figure out like what your priorities are, what your work styles are, all the things that kind of feed into what makes a good placement. And then we get the feedback from the mentors and what they're looking for. And then the big thing is CCST, for a lot of these offices, has been maintaining relationships with them across several different fellowship years. And so it has experience with the specific mentors in offices and can say like, oh, I know that this mentor for fellow X, they said they really like this office, but that mentor is like a little bit of a micromanager, and fellow X really needs independence. And so even though like they really are interested in that subject area, I don't think that's going to be a good fit. I think they'll do a lot better in this office that allows for a lot more freedom. And I think that's really where they'll shine. And so having that experience and expertise is kind of where the magic comes in. But yeah, it's really important that you have the ability to rank, and those rankings are super important in what CCST considers when it's making its final decisions on where everyone gets placed.
Thank you so much for all of your feedback. It is a really multifaceted process, and we try so hard to match personal needs, personal styles. As you mentioned earlier, Jacob, we have different placement offices who are interested year to year for various reasons. And we had over 30, I think, this year who were hoping to get fellows. So it really is a very dynamic and complex process, and it seems to work. So somehow it all works out really well. I will move on to the next question, which is a follow-up to recommendation letters, which I know can be a very stressful thing. And that is one of the reasons that this application cycle, we have taken our number of required letters down to 2, and you can only submit 2. So there's really not an option to submit more, thinking that it might improve your odds. And that was for a lot of reasons, but mostly, as some of you know, it is so hard to get some of these letters. Even when people are so excited about you that you're getting the letters from, they're busy, people forget things. There's just, so many things that can go awry in getting those letters in on time. But conversely, it's more difficult when you're choosing 2 people. So are you at a disadvantage if you only have academic recommendation letters is the question. And I think you touched on it a bit more earlier and how you chose who to ask for your letters and getting variety, but would you like to elaborate on that question at all, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure because I haven't done the application side of things, but like, I don't think you're at a disadvantage. I think as long as those academic mentors can speak to your ability to be flexible and interested in learning and your different work styles, these other things that we brought up as being important and what makes a successful fellow, as long as your academic mentor can speak to that, it'll be a great letter.
I agree. Anything else to add before we move on? All right, thank you so much. I know the letters are a very stressful part of the process. So any further questions about that, of course, you can reach out to staff and ask. What were your career goals for after your CCST fellowship before starting? Did you include that in your application? And how did your goals change by the end of the CCS fellowship? This is a really great question, I think. And we'll start with Natalie on this one.
Sure. I think in my essay, I ended up mentioning more of a long-term goal, which was, in my case, I'm a biostatistician by training. And so, but for me, it was more about having the impact on improving health and being able to connect nonprofits with resources. And so I kind of tied that into how the CCST Fellowship would propel that goal. And then I think more specifically, coming in, I had the idea of either working in more local government or government of some type at the state or lower level, as well as a nonprofit. And that interest is still with me, but I just now have more nuance of understanding of where I could go and the variety of opportunities that I can have.
Thank you so much. Rabab.
Yeah, I think I also was very general and because I remember thinking about what I want from a policy career. I want it to be still research oriented, creative. I knew that I really wanted to be in a creative field, and also still kind of looking at things from a network perspective of like how things are connected and really wanting to have a good network around me. Like I thought that was something that I really wanted to do or be part of. And I also thought it would be somewhere in government or nonprofit or a think tank. And now, yeah, but I would, now thinking back, I do feel like there's a lot of, I'm doing the research that I want to do. It is, I know insurance doesn't sound creative, but it is what we're doing in the climate sustainability branch. It is quite, and it's kind of exciting work. And yeah, and I would not have, I did not even know the word climate finance before. So that's really something I'm interested in now. And also, the impact of climate change on health as well. That's something that I'm learning through my job that I'm really also interested in pursuing. But yeah, so it does change.
And Jacob, what was your experience?
Yeah, I definitely came into the fellowship knowing that I wanted to pursue a career in policy after the fellowship. I was pretty sure that I was done with academia generally for a lot of different reasons. I will say I still love science. I love research and I do kind of miss it. But I was looking for a career that would let me, that my success in that career would benefit from all of the different types of works I like to do, not just one type of work. I love research, I love academia, I love thinking critically. But one thing academia doesn't reward very much is that public communication, is thinking about working with people outside of your field, honestly, is not rewarded that much in academia. Like talking to people and learning broadly is something that is less rewarded in academia, whereas all those things, which I really enjoy doing, are rewarded in the policy world. So I knew I wanted to transition to a policy career. I didn't really know what that meant, where that would be, what options were available, and I learned a ton of stuff during the boot camp, during the fellowship, about what options remained available to me. I don't know, midway through the fellowship, I was pretty sure I wanted to be in the legislature at least for the next couple of years, and that's where I am. So that's very exciting, and I'm happy about that. But I don't know if that'll be true in 10 years from now. Who knows? One of the things that I think is kind of unique to coming to policy from academia is in the policy world, people tend to change jobs a lot more often and change policy areas a lot more often than, say, you have a specialty in academia. And so that flexibility means you'll probably be surprised by where you end up 5 years from now in the policy world, but I think you'll enjoy the trip.
Which do you think is more important? Compatibility with your mentor that you're working for in your placement office, or the interest in a topic that those offices include? And I'll start with Jacob, please.
Mentor fit, absolutely 100% is more important. Not to say you shouldn't, kind of be interested in your topic, but I know that like a lot of people came in thinking Department of Insurance, nah, that sounds boring. And then it turns out they've had a fellow every year that they've, interviewed, because it turns out insurance can actually be really cool from a climate perspective. I knew I wanted to do something that was very different from my PhD, and environmental quality is different. I would say it's not environmental policy isn't my passion area. It's not the thing that got me interested in policy and got me excited and worked up. That'd be labor policy. That's, I think, really what gets me going. But it was a really cool field, and by the end of my year, I really enjoyed what I learned in that committee, and I still want to be involved with environmental policy now moving forward. And that had an impact. And I think it actually was kind of valuable to be, especially in this year where you're doing so much learning, to be in an area that A, is new, and B, is something that you care about, but not necessarily are super passionate about, right? Like, I care about climate change. I think it's bad. I think we need to do things to stop it. But if I was in, say, the labor committee, for example, which was interviewing our year, I think it might have been harder for me to keep as open of a mind and to do as much learning as I did, because I would be coming with more strong preconceived ideas about it.
Thank you. How about Rabab?
Yeah, I agree. I think personality fit is more important. I've always thought and even during my PhD, like I wanted to have a PI that is supportive more than I was interested in my project. I loved it, but that was the number one. And I really focused on that. I remember during my placement meetings and socials, is to know more about the mentors and how they, even when I was skeptical about insurance, they really were very, just how they answer the questions, they were very honest. It felt like, oh, this is a place where if I have skepticism or I have a question about something that we're doing that doesn't make sense to me, they're going to be open about it. And it was a positive experience in that. Like, a place where I could be myself was really important.
Thank you. How about Natalie?
Yeah, I have a lot of very similar opinions as Jacob and Rabab. I think for me coming in, I had some strong ideas of areas that I was very passionate about. And then I ended up going into a field that I knew nothing about. However, I had a fantastic mentor there. And to me, that was certainly the most important thing, of making sure I felt supported. I had the type of guidance that I wanted, but also the flexibility for the types of projects I was involved in. I think willingness from the office or placement area that you're in, for them to listen to you and take your opinions into consideration early on, and just the style that they work. I think those are going to really, throughout the experience, affect how you come out of the fellowship and the different types of project areas that you get to focus on. So for me personally, pesticides are not necessarily the end all be all, but they are housed under the Environmental Protection Agency. And so they do have a mission of protecting public health and the environment through the regulation of pesticides. And so having that be a part of that department, to me, was also really nice to see. So it can be very unexpected in the ways that your interests align with whatever placement office you get into.
Thank you so much to all three of you sharing your experiences. One last question, I think, before we just get into summarizing and any last advice for our attendees. Are the next round of CCST Fellows going to be working remotely? Are they is it a hybrid situation or all in person? I can speak a little bit to that, but what was your experiences? Because I think all three of you were in kind of dynamic situations with all the changes we've gone through this last few years. So I will start with Rabab.
Yeah, I think our year was the first year we started being from the beginning being remote, and I was remote throughout my fellowship, and I have to say, I mean, it was there, there was like, oh, I think for us being like, it felt like we're, when babies don't know what they're missing, it felt like that, like, because it was it still was, okay, it was good to have the connection even through Zoom. So it was mostly a remote experience that I enjoyed, and now I'm more comfortable doing things remote. We are going to the office once a week now in my current, and we have a fellow who's going to also come to the office on Tuesdays. So it's a hybrid situation now, which I think, which is nice, because now we have to, like, usually during those days is when we do all of the in-person meetings and meet people outside of the office. So it's been great.
Thank you, Natalie.
Yeah, I think to my understanding is that it is extremely dependent on which placement office you get. The legislature is much more in person, is my understanding, whereas folks in the executive office, it can change. In Department of Pesticide Regulation, I was entirely remote during my fellowship year, and I'm still like very heavily remote, like maybe just going in once a month. There's probably other offices that have different policies. It's still a lot of learning as we go, and as decisions unfold, then we kind of adapt to that. So that's my understanding of the current year.
Thank you. And Jacob, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, the legislature right now is all in person, but there is no guarantee that it will remain that way as COVID cases changes and as policies change. So it depends is kind of a hallmark of CCST training, and that's the answer to give you is it depends. Depends on your office, depends on what happens in the future, who knows, but CCST does support kind of a hybrid work experience, and what that looks like depends on the placement office you're in. I was going to say something, but I have lost it.
If it comes back, you can feel free to interrupt. From a managerial standpoint, I just want to add that this is an in-person fellowship. So even if your placement office is remote, we ask that you are in Sacramento to participate and within commuting distance of Sacramento. So it can be frustrating, I think, for people who maybe are full-time and homesick, full-time remote and homesick, and you come into the CCST office or even do a Zoom training because we have regular ongoing continuing ed training opportunities. But we do require that you move to Sacramento or a neighboring area to participate in the program. And you can't really, as they all mentioned, you can't really count on it at this point, who will be in person, who will be hybrid by the end of this year, because it has changed so much this past few years, as you can imagine. So I'd like to wrap up.
I remembered it. Yeah, no guarantees about what happens in the future, but your preference is something that is taken into consideration in the placement process.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. We do have people who are really strongly feel they want 5 days a week in office or vice versa. So definitely do take that into consideration. Again, with the flexibility of knowing that sometimes for circumstances beyond the office's control, it can completely change. So we do require that flexibility. It does help. So we're nearing the end of our time today, and I just want to ask our panelists to provide a final word of advice or support or anything you would like to tell our attendees today about just the application process and anything that you encountered that maybe went really well for you or was something that made you nervous, but it worked out well, anything like that. And I'll start with Rabab.
I guess I think just give yourself grace. I remember really, I mean, it was an anxious process. It's a long process. And it's sometimes it's like, oh, this is, especially when you like get to the final stages, it does, like the anxiety gets higher and higher, and you're invested more and more. So give yourself grace during that period, and throughout, whatever stage you're in. And yeah, I would say that,
Thank you.
Thank you
Jacob,
all for joining us.
Yeah, it's very stressful. Hopefully you'll be able to have a little bit of fun during the process, maybe not a lot because there's a lot of stress, but I do remember that like the homework assignment of looking at the legislation and being like, come up with some recommendations, stressful, but also I was looking into it, I was like, this is fun. If this is what I'm going to be doing next year, cool. This is cool work. So hopefully you have some of that experience too. And then feel free to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. Most fellows are happy to talk about the fellowship experience. So if we've got them all listed online where they're currently working, search for them on LinkedIn and message them, reach out. Most of us are happy to help.
Thanks so much, Jacob. And Natalie.
I think a lot of highlighting what folks have already shared. I would say just be reflective and try to find out if this is something that's already of interest to you. Again, reach out to that network. It's all about communication and getting to know other people's experiences. And you have over 100 of us who have gone through a similar process of coming from academia into transitioning into a different space. So I'd highly recommend start to try to connect with folks and see if it's something that you might want to envision. And if you do want to apply, even just get started with that application process. I know there's an ability to get started, partially save it, and then come back to it. So even if you just get started with that, then they'll probably send you some email reminders too to get you continuing to work through the application process. So would recommend getting started if you're interested, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you for bringing that up, Natalie. That is a wonderful point that you can build a profile and save your progress as you go. And that way you're receiving the alerts that come to the system as we proceed through the process. So as you can see, we have a lovely, wonderful alumni network, and that's proven by having these 3 people here today. So I want to thank you so much for your participation and having the experiences that you have gone through, and hearing about that firsthand is really helpful. And I appreciate your time. I want to thank everyone who joined us today as attendees. If you'd like to watch the webinar again or have a colleague that might be interested and couldn't make it today, it'll be posted on our website once we've had some time to process it. And we also have our YouTube channel, which has not only current webinars, but ones from former years, if you're interested in watching them and seeing what different questions were asked. I also invite you to visit our website if you haven't already. We have a fantastic FAQ, a wealth of information about our alumni on there, where they were placed, where they work now. It's just a really great place to go and get a real good overview of the program. And a lot of the questions are answered in those FAQs. You're more than welcome to reach out to me or to Sarah Brady, who is the Deputy Director and the Director of the Fellowship Program. We are happy to answer any questions that didn't get answered today, and really just want this to be as comfortable of a process for you as possible. I know the application process can be stressful, so if you need to reach out to us for any reason, we'd like to make it easier for you. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.